Good morning, Mark.
Good morning.
So listen, I just have an amazing response to this exhibition. I've never seen people come to a show like Black Madonna and spend as much time as they have. I mean, the average time people are spending with this exhibition is 45 minutes to an hour, and in cases, an hour and a half. And it seems to be really striking a chord. People want to talk about the themes that you're dealing with. They want to know what the imagery means. They really want to get into these pieces. Did you have any idea that it might have this impact?
No, but I was hoping it would,
Yeah.
I mean, I'm always gratified when people spend time with the work because it means that the work is resonating with them to the same degree that the subject matter resonated with me.
Mm-hmm.
So no, that's really, that makes me feel good.
What inspired this particular series? I know you've been dealing with issues of race and racial stereotypes throughout your career. This series looks very different in some respects from your previous work. What led to this new series?
Well, it's an interesting melding of my lost Catholicism and my spiritual development. I mean, I've been involved in Eastern meditative practices for close to 45 years. And so, the thing that I realized is that those people that painted icons back in the day, they were leading a very contemplative life. And to a large degree, my meditation is aimed at trying to find that same type of peace. So it seemed like a natural fit for me to kind of merge these two. One of the things that I found in Catholicism is that when you say the rosary, which is repetition,
Mm-hmm.
it's almost akin to repeating a mantra. And I think, after a while, you're saying Hail Mary, and you forget what it is that you're saying. And what happens is that it starts to resonate throughout your system. Your heart rate goes down, your respiration goes down, all these things go down to a baseline level, which is the same place that you get in meditation. So, I had a lot of admiration for those monks back in the day who would spend, half their lives working on one icon or one manuscript. I didn't have that kind of time, but I wanted to kind of emulate that practice in many ways. And so one of the things that you'll see in most of the Madonna pieces is that you'll see these tantos, or these circular figures that, for me, kind of are a characterization of my mantra.
Mm-hmm.
So in the course of the meditation, of course, thoughts come into your head, and you're encouraged to entertain those thoughts. And in this instance, I was looking for that place of love and peace, and that's really embodied in the whole idea of the Black Madonna. And in the background, I had, those darker things that exist in consciousness too, that deal with, the whole idea of white supremacy. And I wanted to put those in there because you can't deny those things exist, but at the same time, they are subdued to a large degree by the overpowering influence of love.
Yeah, I think that's something that people have really responded to. They kind of look at these the same way I first did when I saw them in your studio, which was I sat there for a good half hour, 45 minutes talking to you, and I couldn't take my eyes off these pieces. But it wasn't until that far into looking at them that I even noticed what was going on in the background. I was just fascinated with the Madonna and Child, and it was that dominant in the composition. As it is in the historic pieces, the background, like you think, if you ask someone, what's the background of the Mona Lisa? You kind of go, I don't know, maybe landscape, maybe there's a river there. And it was the same thing with these. So it was very much of a secondary take that you realize, oh, there's this other narrative going on in the background, which finds a real parallel to the time we're going through right now. I think people find that we think we're in one society in one moment in time where there is a very solid sense of civil rights and justice and so on. And we're discovering that's not the case at all, that there are a lot of hidden prejudices and institutional inequalities that are coming to the surface, and we're having to grapple with these issues and realize maybe we're not the country and the society we thought we were.
Right, right. Well, you know, the thing is, those issues have never really disappeared from my community. I've always been aware of them. And it's interesting now to see that given this time of quarantine and people staying at home, that, you know, now they're starting to focus on things that are somewhat outside of themselves. So I'm, you know, I'm pleased to see it. I'm not sure exactly what kind of progress is going to be made, but I'm cautiously optimistic.
Well, you know, I think you're touching on something that I hear as a comment all the time, which is, wow, I can't believe his timing with this show. It seems so, you know, spot on. And my response is, because I know you and I know your work, you've been dealing with these themes your entire career and life. It's only now that it maybe seems to be coming into focus for a much broader audience. And so,
Better late than never.
yeah. So, you know, when I say we're maybe not living in the society and civilization we thought we were, that's from a white perspective who hasn't had to deal with these issues of injustice and driving while white. Yeah, that's never a problem.
Right.
So, you know, and I know you have a lot of stories about driving while black and, you know, and dealing with that growing up in LA, particularly.
Yeah. Yeah.
Which is interesting. You started out your life although you were born in Los Angeles, the first 10 years or so of your life, you were in countries abroad because your father was in the military. So you came back to LA in the early 60s. And what part of town did you live in?
Oh, we first came back, I lived in Leimert Park, an area which now is arguably considered the cultural center of African-American Los Angeles. At the time, though, it was very, very diverse. There were a lot of artists that lived in the neighborhood. There were dancers, there were opera singers, there were just an interesting mix of people. And, you know, I think that the kind of the visual vocabulary that I had developed as a result of being abroad, you know, and going to museums and stuff like that, I was looking for those things when I was here. And in some instances, those people that I came across introduced me to those things here in this city, which I was just unaware of. But it's really interesting. I mean, I didn't experience the classic up in your face type of racism in Europe or in Taiwan that I did here. You know, so for me, it was kind of a new experience. And it was interesting to learn how to navigate through some of that stuff, particularly as a teenager, being raised in a way where I was raised not to compromise, not to put your values aside or anything like that. So I was fairly self-confident, and here I found myself confronting situations where people were trying to chip away at my confidence.
Yeah, well, particularly this is LA pre-Civil Rights Act,
Yeah.
pre-1964, and Voting Rights Act 65. So very volatile time. The police force was, especially in LA, was known for their antipathy to the Black community, and would be only several years later before the Watts riots broke out, where that tension really bubbled over.
We actually call it the rebellion or the revolt.
Mm-hmm.
We try not to call it a riot. It gets characterized that way. And, there are all kinds of associations that are made with riots. A lot of people tend to think that they're mindless acts of violence. When actually, when you deal with a rebellion, it's as a result of an action that's been taken against you.
Mm-hmm.
And it's kind of the logical step to go with that. There was a lot of senseless burning. I'll give you that. Why did people burn their own homes? It's because they didn't own them and probably never would. Why did people burn businesses? Because the people in those businesses oftentimes mistreated them. There were reasons behind these things, but there was also a lot of senseless violence too.
Mhm. The repercussions of that really affected that community, but in some unexpectedly positive ways. I just saw this wonderful documentary that you were involved with on the Watts Towers Art Center, and how that really became a central kind of cultural focus for the community, where really from the remains of the Watts riots, artists started like Noah Purifoy and John Outerbridge and so many others started taking the literal ruins from the riots, or the rebellion, excuse me, and started making art from that. And very much in the same vein of some other LA artists doing assemblage work with the remnants of what had been destroyed and doing something really positive with it.
Yeah, when you don't have a lot of resources to work with, you work with whatever it is that you can find, and you recontextualize it or reconfigure it to suit your purposes. And in this case, people like John Outerbridge, people like Noah Purifoy realized that the remnants from all of that actually told a very interesting story, and they wanted that story to be preserved some sort of way. The irony is that, particularly in the case of a lot of things that Noah Purifoy did, they're extremely fragile because they were, picked up from the ashes, basically. And there's one piece that comes to mind in particular that, it's only shown for like 2 or 3 days at a time, because people don't want to take it out of its container,
Mm-hmm. What was it that clicked for you to take this artistic path?
Oh God, it was really interesting. I was really interested in science when I was growing up,
Mm-hmm.
and I had a little chemistry set, and I got a hold of some chemicals that weren't in the chemistry set, and made something that was kind of volatile and blew up, and set my room on fire. And my mother gave me a whipping that lasted for the better part of 3 weeks. And I was trying to figure out how I could, make peace with her. And so I would do these little drawings, and, at first she was kind of like, but slowly but surely she kind of came around, and then she showed them to some friends of hers, and they said, Mark might have some talent. Um, and she enrolled me into a painting class, and I was in there with a bunch of adults. I'd usually pick the most difficult thing to paint that they had in the room, and I had good teachers. I lucked out in that throughout my career. I think I've had really strong, good teachers who've emphasized the basics, and they taught me in a way that it's like, we're going to teach you this stuff, you're going to learn this stuff, but then you're going to unlearn it, and you're going to find your own voice.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's something that stuck with me, and it's something that I impart to my students all the time, because that's really important. What is it that sets you apart from everybody else? It's that style that you develop that's uniquely your own. What I see oftentimes in the art world now is that a lot of people are borrowing, or they're copying, or they're saying, well, so-and-so was successful, so maybe if I do some of that, I can be successful too, And in some instances it sticks, and in some it doesn't, but it's interesting to watch.
Yeah, no, you said something the other day that I thought was interesting, which is that you say to your students, which is to learn to tell your own story, that you have a story to tell, and find out what that is.
Right. And, in the course of doing that, you got to be prepared to maybe not make a living at it, And so I tell my students all the time, what you're doing is a passion. And if you want to follow that passion, what you need to do is find a way to support that passion. Don't rely on the market to take care of you, because there are too many people out here that are calling themselves artists, and you've got a lot of headwind, you've got a lot of competition. So, if you intend to do this, be prepared to spend some long hours. I mean, I would work a 9-to-5 job and come home and, eat, maybe watch a half hour of news, and then go into the studio and work until 2 o'clock, and then get up the next morning and do it all over again. you know. So yes, I was sleep deprived throughout my 20s and 30s and to some degree my 40s, you know. But you know, ultimately I was able to do what it is that I wanted to do without the consideration of whether or not it's sold. Because if you let the market drive you, you'll do all kinds of crazy things, you know.
Well, and I think that's one of the pressures that we've talked about on young artists today is that, you know, if you do happen to get that early success, it's not necessarily a great thing for your development as an artist.
Yeah.
It creates a lot of pressure to top yourself and do the next thing, and you've got the pressure of a show, um, and really takes you in a different direction where you're not necessarily allowing yourself to dig down deep and not worry whether it's going to sell or be commercial or what people are going to think about it. You need to do it for yourself.
I tell my students all the time, I said, the star that burns twice as bright burns half as long.
I think that's a great saying. I know I had an interview with John Baldessari with Henry Hopkins some years ago when Henry was doing the Sunshine Noir exhibition at the Hammer. And we got talking about this, and John said, you know, listen, if I had the kind of early success that I see some of my students having, I never would have gotten to where I am now because no one was buying my work. No one gave a shit about my work. And so it allowed me to do the work for myself because I figured if no one else cares, at least I care, and I can go off in these wild directions, which he did, which made him the artist that we all now revere and admire. But he wouldn't have gotten there without that freedom to just not worry about how the market or the critical dimension of the art world would react to it.
Yeah, but there is a lot of pressure, you know, peer pressure. You know, your parents will sit there and say, like, you know, why are you going into this? You're not going to make any money at it and stuff like that. You know, to a large extent, you know, people gauge their success on whether or not they're selling anything, you know, and I think that's a problem that academia has kind of pushed forward too. It's like, you know, they want you to make sure that you're commercially successful in something, and all success is gauged by that. When in reality, I gauge my success by whether or not the piece that I did meets all the goals that I've established for myself. You know, and if other people appreciate it, that's fine. But I mean, when I was doing the work back in the early 2000s that dealt with blackface, I fully realized that that was kind of an incendiary subject. A lot of people weren't going to resonate with it, you know. But what it did was it accomplished stimulating a type of dialogue that I felt needed to happen. You know, and interestingly also is that now 20 years later, it's still stimulating that dialogue, you know. So
they're powerful pieces.
From that standpoint, I felt it was very successful. I was always curious when people did buy it, it's like, where are you going to hang that? You know, because it's not like you would take a blackface subject and hang it in the dining room. It might spoil people's dinner, you know. And I always was very careful too. It's like if people were buying it, I tried to vet them to some degree. It's like, you know, to make sure that they weren't going to use this in a way I wouldn't approve of.
Interesting.
You know, because I did know that, you know, in some instances it was more than controversial. You know, when I first did it, my mother thought I had lost my mind because in her generation, you don't touch those subjects. You know, but just like I found it in meditation, if you continue to bury things in the subconscious, they will come out and bite you and affect you in ways you have no control over. So the fact that it did get under people's skin, pun intended, literally, the fact that it did get under their skin to me was very important because it showed a certain degree of work that needed to be done.
I think that's the nerve that you've touched sort of throughout the course of your work. And certainly what you're touching now with the Black Madonna series is that bringing uncomfortable subjects about race to light, whether they are issues of things we've taken for granted and haven't really seen, or things that we realize were completely wrong and inappropriate, and we want to ignore now, cover over and kind of shove into the closet. And I think you're bringing all of that out to light in ways that that's part of the thing people are talking about when they come to the exhibition, is these notions of institutional racism and racial inequality that are there, but for so many people are under the surface and are not brought to light. And what I love what you've done with the Black Madonna series is you've shifted the perspective so that you start to see things that are unusual in a new way. It's unusual to see a Black Madonna and a Black baby Jesus. It's unusual to see white supremacists as the victims instead of the oppressors, but it shifts your perspective in a way that you go, oh, wait a second, this is part of the other side of the coin that people are feeling all the time if you're Black.
Right.
Now you see it in a different way. So it really has struck a chord, and it's amazing to me that this series looks so different from earlier series you've done, and yet is exactly the through line you've been dealing with your whole career, which is what I love.
One of the things too is that in a lot of contemporary art, the whole idea of craft has been de-emphasized for whatever reason. I think it keeps the art schools full, but I don't shy away from craft. I got my degree in painting and drawing, and almost as fast as I got it, I moved into kind of the digital world. But somebody made a comment to me one time, which really stuck with me. It said, we don't see your hand in it anymore. We see keystrokes, but we don't see hands. And the thing is, it's like, if you have that facility, use that facility, And what I found in putting this series together was that how much I had forgotten how to do, some of the basics that I had learned in painting class, I had to go back and revisit those. And so the first few Madonnas that I did were painfully slow, And as I got kind of more into the stride of it, it became a lot easier because those things were coming back to me.
Mm-hmm.
And that was those were very valuable lessons that I learned when I was in art school. And I think that to a large degree, they've been de-emphasized now in academia. And it's unfortunate. I've seen a lot of younger artists now that really know how to use a opaque projector or project their work. They can't draw anymore, but they can sure trace over something.
It's very interesting, that difference between doing something because you've developed the skill to that level and then artificially putting that skill aside and tracing from a projected image or whatever. There's something emotionally lost, I think. It certainly comes through in your work that there is something captivating about the risk that you take, that an artist takes when you employ your skills fully, and I think your drawings in particular, there's no net, there's no safety valve with this work. If you make a mistake, you've got several months of work gone.
Right.
And that precision, that level of concentration, that deep meditation, whatever it is, that zone you get into, I think also brings out other qualities in the work that are maybe not obvious or describable, but that are there and that are powerful.
Well, if nobody else knows it there but me, that's all that's important.
Well, one of the other aspects of Black Madonna that I'm just loving and that people really are responding to are some of the historical figures. You painted in the same style as the Madonnas, but they bring to light very important figures in the African-American history that aren't commonly known. Certainly, I'm learning a lot through this exhibition about various figures and historical events that I didn't know about that are very powerful stories that need to be told. And I've seen people really respond to that.
I asked myself at what point, understanding Catholicism, to the extent that I do, what constitutes a saint? What is it that makes a saint? You know, is it the testimonies of all these people who've been affected by this person? Is it their demeanor traveling through the world and healing or giving advice and stuff like that? The traditional notions of saint can be really extended to a lot of different situations. And so I've picked some people throughout history that maybe were under-recognized. You know, in one instance, I've kind of made a saint out of Sarte Bartman, you know, who was thoroughly exploited, who devolved into prostitution in order to take care of herself. And to a large degree, I feel that the circumstances that drove her to that point, in some ways, kind of made her a martyr.
Mm-hmm.
And so I chose to characterize her as a saint. Or you take a person like Susan Mabry, who was able to pick 500 pounds of cotton in a day. Okay, what was going through her head when she was doing this? You know, did she ever fight back? Did she ever resist? There's no evidence that she ever did. She more or less accepted her lot. She had probably strong religious beliefs that sustained her and kept her from hating the people that she worked for. That in itself, for me, kind of qualified as a saint, okay? And then there's some people who are just under recognized. The Catholic Church, for whatever reason, probably because they were Black, chose not to beatify them or canonize them, you know, like in the case of Anastasia, a Brazilian saint who had miracles that were attributed to her. The Catholic Church never saw that as being justification for even recognizing her on any level.
Well, that to me is one of the most powerful images, where you see how horribly she was treated. She was literally gagged and forced to wear a slave collar around her neck, which eventually killed her. But you've depicted her with such beauty and strength and pride that is unbowed by the way she was treated. And I think that is something people really responded to.
Mm. Glad.
Where do you see the well, let's talk about, there's one other image that just I find very moving in the exhibition, and that's the drawing Zong that it depicts a horrible incident that occurred in the late 1700s. A British slave ship was en route across the Atlantic and got off course and started to run short on supplies. So their solution was to throw 130 slaves overboard to their death. And you've depicted that moment of them being thrown overboard and disappearing, you know, quite quickly into the vast expanse of the composition you've created, which would have been the ocean or to the spirit world. And it's such a moving image about that casual inhumanity that was so accepted, and you know, what really, the part of the story that people find so shocking in fact that it ended up being a catalyst for the end of the British slave trade, was the fact that the ship owners filed an insurance claim for the loss of cargo when they landed. And they lost the case because it was discovered that they went off course. But in the course of that, one of the surviving slaves testified about what really happened, and it created a wave of revulsion against that slave trade, so that Britain pulled out of the slave trade. I just, that story, I think encapsulates so much of the horrors of how people were treated during that time.
Yeah, you know, very little is made of the Middle Passage, and the estimates are that upwards of 500,000 people may have died in the course of passage, because usually when you would bring a shipment of slaves over, you factored in about a 20% loss. In some instances, the entire cargo was lost. You know, so Zong was really important to me, and it's kind of a follow-up to a piece that I did some time ago called The Patron Saint of the Middle Passengers, which interestingly enough bears a striking resemblance to some of the Black Madonnas, if you see them now. So, it could be that the genesis of that series came out of this particular piece a long time ago. The Zong massacre was horrific, and there are other things in history too, like the Igbo landing that hasn't been given that much attention. It was a situation where a number of slaves disembarked in Georgia, and they realized that they were going to become slaves, and so they all just walked into the ocean and drowned themselves. Because in their life, the idea of being a slave was just unacceptable. I'm digging for more stories like this because there are more stories that do exist. Some of them are folk tales, and usually folk tales have some kernel of truth in them somewhere. So stay tuned.
Well, I can tell you the appetite for these stories is huge, and if the people attending this exhibition are any indication, you've got a ready, willing, and eager audience for more.
Okay.
Well, Mark, this has been great. Thank you so much. It's been an just absolute honor to be able to collaborate with you in this exhibition. It's a real dream come true for me.
Thank you so much, Bill. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. Have a great day, Mark.
Okay, you too.